Hello, and welcome to my thesis presentation. Thank you for listening. I am Kimberley Melck, and I am a computer information systems major with a minor in business. Today, I will be discussing my thesis titled Data Analysis of Voting Locations and Polling in Allegheny County, How Voting Changes Over Time in Metropolitan Areas. Before I start, I would like to thank my committee, Dr. Melissa Sobak, Dr. Gina Boff, and Dr. Paul Hetler. As a quick overview before we dive into things, my goal going into this project was to perform data analysis using publicly accessible data to see how voting in Pittsburgh compares to other areas and how it has changed over time. Initially, I wanted to focus on analyzing information related to polling booth locations in voting districts, but the formatting of the data didn't fit the methodology that I used. Still, I will analyze demographic data describing Allegheny County and discuss what that information implies about voter suppression. I chose this topic because last semester, when we were finalizing our topics, discourse about the upcoming election was nearly impossible to avoid. Along with that, discussions of voter suppression, voter fraud, and accessibility to voting stood out as I was looking for topics to research. As a nation, there were debates over how to make the process of voting accessible during the pandemic, and that conversation included how to avoid voter suppression that was already widespread in America. Going into my thesis, I wanted to conduct data analysis, and after hearing about the election coming up, I wanted to find what data there was on our community and learn what that data implies about the state of voter suppression in our community. In my literature review, I wanted to get background information on what voter suppression is, what caused it in the past, and what contributes to it today. I needed an idea of what information to look for in my data analysis for it to be successful. Without relevant background knowledge, I would not be able to perform data analysis efficiently or accurately. Passive voter suppression, campaign mobilization, and the effective disenfranchisement of the poor looks at what voter suppression used to look like and what it looks like now, and what passive voter suppression is and how to prevent it. The politics of voter suppression, defending and expanding Americans' right to vote, is a broader overview of how voter suppression affects voting in America and how it can affect elections. Both of these resources were helpful in gaining a base understanding of what may indicate voter suppression in my research. Data mining is the process of finding an interesting structure in data. Before I could do that, I needed to collect data. For my data collection process, I used data.gov, the home of the US government's open data. Using this website, I was able to download publicly accessible data about Allegheny County. It provided census data from 2000 and 2010, information on school districts in Allegheny County, and employment data. There was also data about voting districts and polling locations, but unfortunately the formatting didn't work with the program that I used to perform my data analysis. For my analysis plan, I used the demographic data that I found describing Allegheny County and looked for patterns to determine what that implies about voting. Referencing the literature review, I also wanted to see how Pittsburgh compares to other areas, such as Atlanta, in relation to voter suppression. On its own, the information that I found doesn't say much about voting, so looking at how that information compares to other places will be helpful in my analysis. Specifically, I was recommended to look at Atlanta, since it makes for a really interesting case study when discussing voting and voter suppression. After finding data that I could use and developing a plan for how to analyze it, I needed a way to perform that analysis. SAS is the program that I used in my big data tools and big data analytics classes, so I felt comfortable using it for my thesis. The program that I used in class required a connection to the school's server, so for my own research, I needed to emulate a server. The Oracle VM VirtualBox simulates a server, so I can run SAS without needing to connect to the school's network or use the school's server. The images on this slide show what the Oracle VM VirtualBox looks like and how it runs SAS. It creates a window that runs the virtual machine, which emulates a server, so you can use your web browser as a host. In SAS, I uploaded all of the data that I found that related to Allegheny County. Most of the data that I found had a data dictionary to go along with it, which describes each component of the data. I had data from a few different sources, so it was important to look at each data dictionary to understand what data I was working with before trying to do anything with that data. The slide shows an example of a data dictionary that I used, which has each field and a brief description of the data in that field. Once I had an idea of what data I was working with, I experimented with different data models to visualize each component of the data to make it easier to understand. Using the data described in the previous data dictionary, this graph shows the average riders on different public transportation routes each month. Each symbol represents a different bus route. While initially this may not seem relevant to voting, we can look at where each of these routes is located and see how that compares to the voting districts. Looking at this graph, you may ask, is the accessibility to voting proportionate to the amount of people who live and work in this area? Or will people who rely on public transportation be able to access their assigned voting locations? We also see that the average amount of bus riders dropped significantly in the time leading up to the election due to the pandemic. This may also lead you to question if these people are still able to visit their voting locations or if they will be able to vote remotely. In the 2016 presidential election, there was, according to the United States Census, a 30% reported turnout gap between the wealthy and the poor. In addition to looking at the bus usage throughout Pittsburgh, we can also look at property values to make a stronger profile for what the demographic information tells us about voting activity. In this graph, each dot represents a different property value, and they are sorted by their value and their location. There are clear differences between each school district based on how the property values and the number of properties in each district. As shown in Figure 6, income is a strong indicator of if someone votes. If there is a clear disparity between property values in Allegheny County, that may indicate that there is also a disparity in income, and furthermore of a disparity in voting. This chart shows the annual salary in 2017 and 2020 of workers in Pittsburgh, sorted by their starting date. The different symbols are for each different department. Aside from some outliers, there isn't a significant amount of difference between these two charts that stands out to draw any conclusion from. We can use the visualization of annual salaries in Allegheny County to make some assumptions in relation to voting, but that's about it. Recently, state lawmakers in Georgia made provisions to restrict access to early or absentee voting and require an approved form of identification. Senate Bill 202 has been compared to the voting laws present during the Jim Crow era. While some of the data that I analyzed may indicate signs of voter suppression, that seems insignificant when there are clear signs of it occurring right now. While I was looking for de facto signs of voter suppression in Allegheny County, a movement for de jure voter suppression is underway in the state that Atlanta is located in. Initially, I planned to do a case study comparing my results to the information on Atlanta, but as of right now, that is not a fair comparison to make. Going into this, I expected to find gradual changes over the years that may indicate a mild amount of voter suppression. While I did not find that in Allegheny County, there is still clearly evidence of voter suppression, maybe just not in our community. While I was looking for subtle trends in voting that changed gradually, majorly impactful changes to suppress voting are being made in plain sight. Going into my thesis, this is not the conclusion that I imagined that I would be giving, but it feels fitting. While data analysis and data mining can be used to find deeper insights and structure in the data that we already have, they are not tools to predict the future. My research did not go as planned, but that is a part of it as a learning experience. Again, thank you for listening to my thesis.